All right, so hi everyone. My name is Duncan, and I am a librarian at YRL with the Library Development Services Department. Thank you for coming to our Diversity Audits 101 webinar. The hope is that by the end of today's session, you're going to have the knowledge and the tools to begin assessing your library's diversity and create more inclusive, community-centered collections. I kind of have my chat screen hidden away from me. So feel free to pop in questions and comments throughout, but there will be an opportunity at the very end for me to address any questions that come up. So just hold on to them and we will get to them. This session is being recorded and the recording will be sent out to everyone who registered, and it'll also become available on various YRL platforms such as YouTube, Niche Academy, and the intranet. All right, so let's dive in. This is an overview of today's session. We're going to start by defining what a diversity audit is and why it matters. I'm going to show you where you can find a lot of the tools and the resources we talk about today, as well as some example audits for you to reference before you start your own. We're going to look at the 5-step process for audits, or what I'm calling a 5-step process. And with this process, we're going to keep in mind our end goals while we plan out the whole procedure of the audit. I'm going to share recommendations throughout, but I will highlight some important ones in this section, 2 of which being goal setting and time management. We'll work through the 5-step process with the help of the YRL Excel templates. So these were created here at YRL, and they're pre-made fillable templates that are intended to make your auditing easier. So we'll take a look at those. And then the last part is I'm going to touch on finding the number of items in your collection that have diverse subject headings. And this is a very relevant service that I think you can use not only for collection development and analysis, but also for potentially responding to challenges. So we have a lot of great content today, and we're going to jump right in. All right, so to begin, a diversity audit. A diversity audit is what it is a thorough assessment of all or parts of a library's collection to evaluate how well it represents a wide range of perspectives, cultures, and experiences. So the goal is to ensure that the collection authentically reflects your community and it includes diverse voices. So we're going to think of a diversity audit as almost like a health checkup, right? We're checking that our collection is healthy and that it is serving our community. Now, the results of an audit are really going to help empower us to make data-driven decisions about acquisitions, weeding, and future resource development. These audits are important and they matter because they help us evaluate whether our collections are ensuring representation and inclusivity. They can help us identify gaps in our collection. It helps us to support equity and access, to strengthen community engagement, and then also to promote informed decision-making and collection development, which again can also be really helpful for challenges to materials. So all the resources and the information in today's session are on our intranet, specifically the Diversity Audit intranet page. And this is a really great resource to help you map out your audit and learn about the process. If you're interested in looking at some examples of completed diversity audits, we have a couple examples linked on the page. One is an example or a real life example we did for a YRL library. They were kind of our test guinea pig subject through this process. And then the other 2 linked are for 2 other Canadian libraries. And these are very high level audits for large public library systems. But reading through them and just taking a look at them can give you a bit of a roadmap on how to complete your own audit. And I just want to talk about these examples a little bit more before we dive in. So again, these are both very high level, but different in approach. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to get across, is that your diversity audit is going to be different from your neighbor's diversity audit, right? They're not going to look exactly the same. So I would suggest looking through these prior to your own, just to get ideas on the methodology that they used, what their goals were, and how they display their findings, as seen in the slide here, right? One is very detailed, on the left-hand side here, and the other is a little bit more categorized or grouped together, their findings. But I wanted to show these because A, they're both Canadian, and B, they use different methods. So on the left, the Peterborough Library is auditing using physical shelf lists, or doing a physical audit. So whatever's on their shelves at the time with their staff. Whereas the Ajax Public Library, they're doing 3 different segments of auditing. So they're doing the physical audit, but they're also adding a customer checkout component to their auditing. And they're also auditing any new items that are brought into the library during their auditing period. So it adds like a whole new dynamic to their auditing process. So neither is right, neither is wrong. They're just different, and they're looking for different things. So just keep that in mind as we go through today's presentation. Okay, so this is the diversity audit process. It's a 5-step plan, and I want to give a top-down overview of what this looks like. We're going to start with planning, right? Why are we doing this audit? How are we going to do this audit? And who is going to do this audit? Who on our staff is going to have the time to audit this? The next stage is the pre-audit, or what I like to call the data collection phase. So this is where we determine, right, what are we looking for? Everything that we collect here in this phase, we're going to compare the results of our audit to. So we want to find demographic data, high-level collection data, community data. We want to find out who our patrons are, who lives in our community, so that we can see if they are being represented in our collection once we complete the audit. And that is step 3, the actual audit itself, the diversity audit. So we're going to do this line by line, and it is a bit of a tedious process. It takes time, but that's why we want to be prepared with our planning. We want to be prepared with all of our community information, our data collection, before we start doing the actual work. And then once we've done the audit, once we've worked through line by line all the items we're auditing, it's time to analyze, right? We have a large amount of data, so we want to compare the data collected from our audit to stage 2, and then do some analysis. Are there areas of significance? Are there areas for improvement? That's what stage 4 is all about. And then the last step is stage 5, which is our next steps. So now that we have the data and we can see the areas of significance or the areas of improvement, we want to determine an action plan. So does that mean purchasing new materials? Does that mean adjusting policy? What are we now doing as a result of this diversity audit? Okay. Now, before we look at each piece of the process individually and get a little bit deeper in, I want to jump ahead and start with the analysis step. And I hope that by directing you to this step and kind of giving you the knowledge on this step of the process, you can get a clearer idea of what you're looking for and what we're trying to do here. Because I think having an idea of the kind of analysis you want to do might help you come up with some objectives for your audit, some goals. Right? And the analysis is going to inform your next step and those actionable items that you're going to take. So once we've completed our audit, again, we're jumping ahead, but don't worry, we'll go back. Based on the data gathered from that audit, we want to use that data to analyze one of the following things, if not all of them. We want to look for representation gaps. So we want to evaluate the cultures and the identities that are underrepresented in our collection in comparison to the community data that we gathered. So we're doing a lot of community and collection comparison and seeing if it lines up. We're going to look at collection balance, right? Does our collection provide a balanced view of different perspectives, or does it maybe lean disproportionately towards certain groups or certain viewpoints? So maybe something like politics or religion are factors that you want to put into your audit and to audit for. We're going to look at patron needs and feedback. So we're going to compare our findings with user feedback to make sure that the collection meets our patrons' diversity and inclusion needs, right? Are patrons asking for representation or content that is not currently in the collection? And what are we doing about that, right? Policy alignment, huge one too. So as a result of the audit, do we need to review existing collection development policies and identify any gaps that are between the policy and the actual practice, right? Is our policy accurate to what's in our collection? Same goes for acquisition practices, right? Assessing how well those practices are in promoting diversity. Are we purchasing based on what's needed in our collection, or are we just purchasing based on our own interests? Same for weeding practices. How is weeding impacting collection diversity? And when we weed, what content are we removing, right? Do we need to ensure that as we weed out materials that we're keeping up with representation as those items are removed? Okay, so those are some things to think about ahead of time before we even begin the audit, right? This is what we're looking for as a result of our findings. Okay, and then after analyzing all this, we can determine our actionable next steps, whether that's purchasing or policy or whatnot. Okay, back to our 5-step process. So that was step 4, and keep that in mind. We're going to continue. We'll move on to step 1, but we're going to talk about some recommendations to consider before we even begin the planning phase, right? So 2 huge things: setting goals, right? We want to make sure that we have clear goals or clear objectives in our audit. So that looks like defining the scope. Is this audit going to cover the entire collection? Or is this only going to be a specific area? Maybe we're only auditing young adult materials or graphic novels, right? Establishing metrics, right? We want to decide on the criteria that we're using. So there's no maximum quota for diversity, but as a result of our findings, are we trying to match our collection, our percentages of representation in our collection to the community data we pulled, or are there other data sources that we want to try and match our collection representation to? That's something to think about before we even begin. And then outlining objectives. We want to define, what are we aiming to achieve? Could that be like identifying gaps or assessing the inclusivity of the collection? Right, what's one core objective of this? Is this just meant to be a snapshot of what's in our collection, or are we working towards more inclusivity based on the data that we've pulled? Time management. So I cannot stress this one enough. Performing a diversity audit can be quite time intensive due to the need to review each item in the collection individually. And because of this, I do recommend that you start or you limit your audit to a specific collection code in your library. Or if you're interested in doing a collection-wide audit using random sampling techniques for efficiency, and then you can extrapolate that data and throw it across your entire collection. However, if time is a concern, there are other approaches we can use. Just keep in mind that about 100 titles of auditing is going to take you around 3.5 hours, if not longer. Right. So if you have a huge collection and you're going to audit thousands of titles, even with a random sample, it's still going to take a lot of staff time. Okay, so that's something to plan out before we even begin. But there are other methods, right? It doesn't have to be a full-on diversity audit. You could start auditing all your new purchases going forward, right? You could audit the content that you're weeding. You could do regularly audit book lists and displays, even briefly, just to ensure that there's strong inclusion and representation. And then we talked about random sampling. Huge help. Audit a randomized sample of your collection, and then use that data just to give a snapshot of what your collection has. I would try to aim for at least 10%. But if you're doing a very large project and you're short on time, then going down to 5% might be what's best for you. All right, so we're going to get into the first 3 steps of our 5-step process, but we're going to use the YRL Excel template for those steps, and that's what the template is intended for. It's to make those first 3 steps easier. Many libraries, when they audit, they're going to use a tracking sheet. So we've created a tracking sheet in this template that anyone can download to use. And this is really to make that planning, pre-audit, and audit work just easier to work through. So these are located on the intranet. We have a fiction template and a nonfiction template. You will have to make a copy for yourself and download. So we have instructions here, but also on the intranet how to do that. Because if you start working on it in the intranet, it's just going to edit everything and we'll have to upload a new one. So please download a copy. But there are 3 sheets within the template. The first sheet being part of the planning phase, the second sheet being the pre-audit or data collection phase, and the third sheet being where you can, is the tracking sheet where you do the actual audit. Okay. Now, a thing about the templates is that these are not concrete, right? Once you download a copy, you can adjust, change, or edit anything within them, right? Because the factors that you choose to audit for are going to be different than other libraries. So feel free to, you'll see once we get in, but feel free to move around columns, add in information, take out, they're editable. So let's go through each and we'll talk about the audit process. All right, so this is what they look like. This is the first sheet in the Excel sheet. And this is where you're going to find step-by-step instructions on planning your audit. So the left side of the sheet gives you instructions on working through the audit template, including how to run collection reports in Simply Reports, and gathering data from Environics and BookNet Canada, which I will talk about in a bit. You can find this data yourself through the intranet, or you can always contact YRL and we can assist you in retrieving this and setting up your template. This sheet on the right also includes a planning section, and this is meant to help you set goals and map out the who, what, when, where, why of your audit. And this is important, right? You can go as detailed as you wish, but it is important, again, to set goals before we begin. So these are some of the questions and things that are on there, right? Like who's conducting the audit? Do you need some kind of YRL assistance? What part of your collection is going to be audited? What's important to you, right? What information are we looking for? Right? Important to identify that. Are there certain categories we wish to identify it for, or wish to audit for rather? And then time management, when is this taking place and how many staff hours will we dedicate? Is this a year-long project that we're going to do in phases, or is this something we can complete in a weekend? All right, sheet 2 lines up with step 2 of the process. So this is the pre-audit or the data collection phase. And this is where we're going to import your library and community's demographic data. So this is going to allow us to compare the results of our audit to our community and see if there are any areas of significance. We at YRL, we have access to a product called Environics. And Environics gives us high-level demographic data from areas that we can map out on our own. So we have all of YRL's libraries, communities mapped out, and those are on the intranet if you're curious to see those. But within the Environics report, there are a whole bunch of different pieces of data, and you could add any of those to this sheet and then compare your results to those. But these are a few that we suggest. One would be the visible minority status. So we've been inputting like the top 5 for communities, and then we're able to see those top 5 minority status and compare them to what is represented in our collection. I would also add in the top languages spoken at home other than English. I would look at the Indigenous identity information in the report. And I would look at immigration population by place of birth as well. Okay. So that is all on the right side of this second sheet. On the left side is space to import other relevant information or reports that you run. So this can be kind of adapted as you need. You could upload the collection that you're planning on auditing, and that would be before you've decided the random sample. Another report you could input here is the trend analysis report from BookNet Canada. And this is a report that YRL has access to. Again, these are all uploaded on the intranet. But it allows you to see the top circulating subject headings within the entirety of your library's collection. So this is kind of neat to see, and give you an idea of what the most popular subject headings are before you even begin your audit. This report, however, we're unable to run it against a specific collection code. It has to be against the entire collection. So do keep that in mind if that's something you're interested in. But this space, I mean, you might have other community or demographic data from other sources, maybe other census data you found online or from the government. So I would think of this page, again, as what you're comparing your results to. We have suggestions in place here, but ultimately it is up to you. All right, this is the fun part. So this is where you're going to perform and track your audit. So it's this lovely kind of Easter colored sheet here. So we have 3 columns at the start of this sheet, and this is a space for the call number, title, and author for your random sample or the collection that you're auditing. And then beside that, we have all these different factors that you can input. So we have different categories like character ethnicity or protagonist ethnicity, character identity. So this would include things like, is the character religious, or does the character have a disability? Is the character LGBTQ? We have author diversity. So is the author an own voices author? Maybe we're checking to see if the author is writing a story and is actually not of that minority that they're writing the story about. And then subject headings is also something, and these can be found in the item records of the titles. But yours are going to differ, right? Depending on what factors, what diversity factors you are looking for. I would recommend, though, from the previous sheet, taking these top visible minority status from the Environics report and inputting those in under character ethnicity, right? And so what this is going to allow us to do is, as we're auditing, we're actually auditing for from community data. Okay? We're auditing for who lives in our community. So these columns, again, can be adjusted depending on what your project goals are, or if you're auditing multiple collections, like let's say you're doing graphic novels and picture books. We could have a graphic novel sheet and then duplicate it and have a picture book sheet, and then keep it all in the same file. But again, when setting this up, you're going to choose the factors you're auditing for and go from there. Now, not as typical, but sometimes libraries might want to do a nonfiction audit, right? And this can be a little bit different because now we're not looking for things like protagonist or main character ethnicity. We might be looking at things like author diversity, or if there's cultural perspectives in the nonfiction titles we're looking at. Publisher information even. Are we only bringing in titles from mainstream publishers? Is there a lot of niche or small print publishers represented in our collection? And social justice topics as well. So once you've determined what factors you're going to audit for and you've set up your sheet, then you're good to start filling it out. And this is an example of that. So this is an example of the template. And keep in mind that this is very thorough and there are a lot of factors in here. Yours may not look like this. Yours might be much simpler and much smaller. But this is just like the full kit and caboodle of what it could be. So this was from a picture book collection from a YRL library. And we did a random sample of 5% of that collection, and we worked through it line by line, filling in all available information. Now, one recommendation is, as you finish these sheets, I would total the columns at the bottom with the number of instances of representation or identity. And that's going to make your analysis a lot easier. So if you do it as you go, then you don't have to come back and make sure everything adds up. And this is a nonfiction example, okay? So this is for a nonfiction juvenile collection. And again, we don't have things like the main character ethnicity. We have metrics that focus on author diversity and cultural perspective content, and some publisher information over here too. Now you might be asking, okay, where do I find this information, right? How do I find out if the protagonist is of a certain ethnicity or if they identify a certain way? Well, it's important to find some reliable sources for finding that information. And in the YRL example library that we used, I had a mix of websites that I like to refer to. So things like Kirkus Reviews, Goodreads, even Amazon would have some of that information available, especially author information. And I checked out a lot of author and publisher websites as well. Now, sometimes as you go through, and especially with random samples, not all the information is going to be available. And that will need to be taken into consideration and analyzed as part of the audit. But overall, when working through these, I wouldn't spend more than a couple minutes per title, right? It's tedious, it takes a long time, but the longer we're spending on each individual one, the longer that this is going to take. So set a time limit and then just keep working through it. And then we're back to step 4, the analysis part. So we've gone through the first 3 steps with our YRL template, and then the analysis step is where you have to kind of step outside the template and do your own analysis. Now for this library example, we did a very large report. It's like an 18-page report that you can read on the internet. But this is an example of how we chose to display the results of this library. So once we finished filling out the sheet, we could start analyzing the data. And we entered all the data into tables like this. And we can see on the right here, this is for character, ethnicity, and all their fiction collections. And we have all the different ethnicities on the left here, and then all the different collections straight down. But it's easy for us to go in at a glance and see where there are areas for improvement because everything is color coded. And this can be an effective method, especially if we're handing this to stakeholders, so that they can easily glance and see what is missing based on our audit results. And because we chose the factors of this audit specific to this library's community, we know that these gaps are important to address because it meets the goals of what we're looking for. Same with this nonfiction table. This was looking for author diversity through several different nonfiction collections at this library. Okay, and then from the results, from that data, we're able to identify some key findings, and this is all part of the analysis, right? Analysis leads to key findings. And then from here, we can determine some next steps and recommendations moving forward. So again, if you're interested, I won't read through all of these, and there are more that are more detailed in the report, but please check out the report, it's on the internet. But we found from this library that there was limited representation of BIPOC and Indigenous characters. There was an underrepresentation of diverse authors and cultural perspectives in nonfiction. And we found some language and cultural gaps in the collection, specifically an Indigenous language gap. It was absent despite a Métis population in the community of almost 1,500. Okay. So the key findings from part 4 of the analysis help to inform these next steps. And the next steps are going to look different for everyone, but these are just some examples of actionable items or actionable steps that we can take from an audit that we can then share with staff and stakeholders and create some kind of plan, right? So we want to do things like we want to set goals for improvement. So maybe one of the goals is we will audit all new purchases moving forward as a result of this, right? Or more of an action plan. If we're saying we're going to commit to a 10% increase in own voices authors over a 2-year span. And then you can have like check-ins throughout the 2-year span and see if the percentage has actually increased. One of your actionable steps might be updating policy. So maybe we're going to be looking at implementing a weeding policy that considers diversity and inclusivity. And what does that look like? Part of it might be engaging stakeholders and staff. So we're now going to share and highlight the results of this audit with our board and with our staff. Monitoring, continual monitoring and adjusting over time. So maybe we're creating a schedule based on our audit of when we want to check in and see if things have improved. And then, of course, purchasing and promoting new diverse titles and resources, which is what a lot of the actionable steps will be from our audits. It's going to be purchasing new books, right? Getting that representation in there and better reflecting our community. So these are the recommendations that were part of the example library audit. This is just to give you some more ideas. And these are broad headings, but they do, again, in the report, they have more specific action items within them. So things like expanding Indigenous and BIPOC representation. So you could say we're going to ensure that at least 15 to 20% of our acquisitions feature Indigenous and BIPOC characters, which aligns closer with our community's demographic diversity. Broaden language and cultural materials, right? Maybe we're going to incorporate more multilingual materials, especially languages that account for a large percentage of speakers in our community. Strengthening collection development practices, addressing the overrepresentation of animal and non-human characters. This is very common. In this collection in particular, animal and non-human characters represented over 50% of protagonists in picture books, just under 40% in juvenile fiction, and over 60% in graphic novels. And that's all while human diversity remains kind of underrepresented. Okay. And then continual audits was another recommendation for this library. All right. Now, if part of your next step is purchasing diverse materials, I have compiled a little list of sites for ideas. These are also all linked on the Diversity Audit intranet page, so you can click into them and do some more exploring. And many titles from these resources will be available through like ULS, Amazon, and the CCD tool. So if you're not purchasing directly from these sites, there are other methods to getting these titles. But take a look through these. There are some great resources among them. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about is another service that YRL offers that can help with auditing, but can also help with collection development and responding to challenges. And this is a way to determine how many titles in your library's entire collection have diverse subject headings attached. So this can really identify how much diverse content currently exists in your collection, and whether whether there's overrepresentation in areas within that diverse subject. So in order to do this, we have several record sets that have been made, and these are authority record sets. So we have one for BIPOC subjects, we have one for Indigenous subjects, one for LGBTQ, mental health, and social issues. And if you look at the image on this screen, this was a library's collection compared against the BIPOC subject record set. But from this, we can see that the top 10 subject headings used in this library's collection, then this is across 50 unique titles, are these. So we can kind of get a sense of what kind of representation we are seeing within the BIPOC subject headings in our library's collection. Now, when we run these reports, they don't show up clean like this. This is something I did afterwards. But we can definitely adjust these to show you the top 10, or if you want to see everything in one big chunk, we can also send that as well. However, individual titles in these reports may appear multiple times if they do have multiple subject headings from the same record set. So this means that a title with several subject headings from one of the record sets might be listed multiple times. So we just have to take that into consideration. All right. And these record sets, I will say, they're not conclusive. They do need continual additions of new and relevant subject heading terms, But this is something that YRL is working on an annual basis. So we're kind of continually updating these as we go. So again, these are not only useful for audits, but especially in cases when we're responding to content challenges and what's actually in our collection under these diverse subject headings. Gives a snapshot of what's there without having to do a very time-consuming audit. So if you would like your collection run against any of these record sets, you can contact me directly, or you can send an inquiry to Ask YRL, and we can get that for you. Not seeing any questions. All right. Well, if you're interested in doing your own diversity audit project, set up for success, we are here for you. Definitely check out the internet page. I think I posted that already in the chat. Yeah, thank you all for attending. I don't see any questions here, and we hope to keep in touch. All right, I'm going to end this one here. Thanks, everyone. We will see you at the next one. Awesome. Thanks, Gloria.